Hello, this is Elena from the SDM Foundation, and we're here today to talk podcasts. So, what exactly is a podcast? It's an audio file, essentially. It's an audio form of media. You might think of a radio show as the live version of audio media, and a podcast is a recorded form of media. It could be as short as 10 to 15 minutes. It could be as long as 2 to 3 hours. It's recorded and published digitally for download or streaming. I kind of liken it to where cable TV is the live version of television. Netflix and Hulu are the streaming services that have sort of disrupted that. So radio is like the live broadcast of audio media, and podcasts are the streaming, available on demand ways to get a wide variety of audio programs. So, in general, what are the genres? What are the formats? The genres and topics can be really, really wide. It can be basically anything. Formats tend to be a little more predictable. You generally see a consistent podcast host or hosts, like a consistent one or few people who show up every episode. And maybe it's an interview show where they're bringing in guests and talking. Maybe it is just them talking, either the one or the few hosts. And they could be talking about whatever topic. They could be covering a news story. They could be covering a fiction story. They could be covering something educational. Maybe they have a variety show where one episode is an interview and then the next episode is more monologue, and another episode is a educational interview and another's a conversational interview. And then you can also have podcasts that are more like storytelling. So maybe a single episode is a story start to finish, or much like the series of a TV show that you have episodic, plot arcs that go over a series of multiple episodes. You will see sometimes that podcasts are recorded on video as well, and which seems counterintuitive, right? That people are publishing video podcasts to YouTube. But you'll notice it's much like when a radio show is recorded live, that there's not a lot of cut scenes or anything. It is a video of people sitting down in front of very fancy audio equipment. And so the focus is not on the video production quality. The focus is always on the audio production quality and the conversation they're having. So that previous description was pretty vague and amorphous. So I just brought a few examples of podcasts from different genres. I don't listen to all of these. None of these are particular recommendations, but these are just examples of different genres. So in the news category, there's the BBC Global News podcast, and that is just a very straight, news broadcast show of different episodes of news bulletins and news stories. The Moth is an example of a storytelling podcast. Serial is a true crime podcast. They're on their 4th season now. Unswaddled is a parenting podcast. I think it's actually recorded pretty local to the Boston area. There are even podcasts for kids like Circle Round. I'll admit that we listened to this one. It's kid-friendly stories and can definitely help on a long car ride sometimes. There are business and economics podcasts like Planet Money. There are comedy podcasts like How Did This Get Made, which is about different things that flopped, like movies and TV shows, and how did it get released and all the funny stories behind it. There are podcasts about other media like TV and film. So for Office Ladies, 2 of the actresses that were on the show The Office, the American one, they have a podcast where they go rewatch old episodes of The Office and then fill in details about what was happening behind the scenes while they were filming it. And sometimes some of their Office co-stars will be guests on the podcast. So it's a little bit like a podcast about a TV show, but also celebrities, but also entertainment. And then, of course, there's the self-help, self-improvement genre. An example of that is the Happiness Lab. So these are just a few quick examples of many, many, many podcasts and genres out there. So that was what are podcasts, but now where do I find them? How do I listen to them? The short answer is you do so on a podcast app. So some examples include Apple Podcasts, which are included on all Apple devices, both phone, tablet, and computer. Google used to have a specific Google Podcast app. They're kind of filtering everybody into YouTube Music now for that whole audio experience. Audible, which is an Amazon affiliate that does primarily audiobooks, they also have a podcast wing of their app. And you might be wondering what's the difference between an audiobook and a podcast. And it's not that much different, but generally an audiobook is an oral reading of a written text, and it can take like 10 or 20 hours to read a book out loud sometimes. So apps that are designed for podcasts are generally expecting audio files of a smaller size, whereas Audible, which is sort of made for audiobooks, can also handle podcasts. Also, Spotify, which is a music streaming app, also has podcasts on it. It's actually one of the, I think Apple Podcasts and Spotify are kind of the bigger players for podcast apps. A lot of Spotify has paid a few artists to go, a few podcast hosts to go like Spotify exclusive on their platform to make it more appealing to buy into their membership and everything. There are also other sort of unaffiliated apps. Pocket Cast is, I just put that up there. It's the one I use. It's also cross-platform. So Pocket Cast has an iOS app and an Android app, and you can access it online. There are lots of others out there. I think Overcast is one that works for iPhones, and Podcast Addict is one that works for Android. So depending on the feature set you're looking for or the platform you're on will depend on what you want, and we'll cover that again in a little bit. How do these apps work specifically? A little bit of behind the scenes. You don't have to know this to use podcasts, but you may have heard of something called an RSS feed. RSS stands for really simple syndication. RSS is a technology that can be applied kind of to any website, and it is more of a protocol that says how and where a website can publish a document that says like what is the most up-to-date information. And so if something or someone is subscribed to an RSS feed, they know exactly where to check to see if anything new has happened. So anything that's acting as a podcast app is acting as a type of RSS feed reader, and it's checking for updates on your behalf so that you don't have to go searching when a new podcast episode happens. It's the podcast app is saying like, is there something new yet? Is there something new yet? And then when that RSS feed has something new to offer, it will download your new episode for you. So that's pretty cool. What else do podcast apps do besides being an RSS feed reader? Obviously, they download and play podcasts. There is a slight difference between downloading and streaming. Downloading means that you take all of the content of that audio file, download it onto the device. So maybe your phone. So it's like some megabytes of data are downloading onto your phone and you're playing from there, as opposed to streaming, which means just like getting little bits of the audio file just over the air, over the internet. If you want to save storage, streaming is good, but you run the risk of your Wi-Fi connection getting interrupted. So generally when I'm listening to podcasts, I like to download it so that I know I have the whole audio file. There should be no skips or any interruptions. Podcast apps also can subscribe to a podcast. So there's a podcast that you know that you like and you want to hear every episode of. It comes out once a week. If you subscribe in your podcast app, then it will be constantly looking for the new episode for you, and it will auto download new episodes as they come out. You can also save your favorite episodes or see your listening history, or obviously browse and discover more podcasts to listen to. How do I pick a podcast app that is right for me? I would start first with, do you already have or use an app that can also act as a podcast app? So do you already pay for, or do you already use Spotify for music? Then you might as well use it for podcasts too. Are any of the podcasts you want to listen to exclusive to a platform. So if you're getting into podcasts for the first time and you found a podcast you really like and it's only offered on Apple Podcasts or it's only offered on Spotify or only on Audible, then that will make the decision for you. That'll make it pretty easy. If you have an iPhone, you already have Apple Podcasts included. Google obviously is pushing YouTube Music for everything Android. Another thing to consider is what sort of features do you want? And if you're new to podcasting, maybe you don't have a laundry list of features that you need yet. But as you start to listen, you might notice that maybe you want to start listening to episodes sped up because listening to lots of podcasts can take a lot of time. So sometimes you can speed up the conversation, or trim silences is one of those that an app can automatically detect when gaps in the conversation and just trim the silences so the conversation goes quicker. And apps will let you listen at higher speeds, but maybe an app will only let you listen at 1.5 speed. And the app that I use lets me listen at like 1.2 speed or 1.3 times as fast in case 1.5 is too fast for me or whatever. And so some apps come with feature sets that it's like you can pay for an app that has a richer feature set, or there's a lot available for free again. So you probably don't need to pay anything until you know what is like most comfortable and usable for you, and what would, if podcasts are a thing that you really get into, then you'll probably start to pick up on some of those features, paid or not. Okay, how much do podcasts cost? Are they free? Generally, there are a lot of free options out there, but it depends. So podcasts do take time and energy and money to produce. So how are those podcasters making their money back? In general, for all the free podcasts out there, they run ads, right? They will be in the middle of the program. They will talk through an ad. The podcast itself could be a paid partnership. So if I have a podcast and a company wants me to kind of sponsor them, they could pay to be on my podcast and I could interview somebody from their company. So I could be making money that way from a partnership, or an affiliate link. If I do a podcast about like, what's my morning routine, right? And I say, and I always drink this brand of coffee. Check the link in the show notes for how you can get this coffee at 25% off with my code. So affiliate codes and ads and sponsorships are some ways that can subsidize a free podcast. Another way is that you could be paying for a membership, either for the app or for the podcast itself, to get access to ad-free episodes or exclusive content. So if you are a paid member of Spotify, the platform, music and podcasts, you could be getting ad-free listening. Or if there's a particular podcast that you want to support and they have a Patreon or they have some other way that you buy into their extra content, then you could be supporting somebody like that directly. Also, maybe the podcast is affiliated with one, like a Spotify exclusive or an Audible exclusive. And specifically with Audible, for any Audible originals, Audible exclusives, Audible has no free tier, right? So if there's something that you wanted to listen to that was an Audible exclusive, you would have to be paying for the membership of the Audible platform in order to access it. So that's how it could start to cost money. But in general, there is so much free content out there. You can find a lot. So you're ready to get started. You want to start listening to podcasts, but you have no idea what podcast to listen to. Where do you even begin? Basically, all podcast apps will have some sort of feature called Discovery, where you can discover new shows to listen to. And one way to pare down, if you're looking through the whole catalog of podcasts, is to do so by category. Generally, these are kind of standardized categories across, podcast apps. I think Apple and iTunes may have had like a hand in making these back in the day. But basically, if you are a big history buff, then you can go straight there. And a lot of these Discover pages will bump like very popular podcasts to the top of the list. I mean, you can obviously search on specific things, but if you want to drill into kids and family, health, true crime, which is, there's a lot of true crime podcasts out there, not for the faint of heart, music, technology, business, basically almost anything that you could think of to have a podcast about, it's out there. So picking a category might help pick your first one. Let's go ahead and show a demo of what this actually looks like in practice. Just a quick disclaimer as we go through this example of a podcast application. I'm not going to have control over what the algorithm is recommending me for podcasts. So anything that you see here, don't take it as a recommendation per se, just take it as informational. Okay, so here we have an iPhone. This happens to be the SDM iPhone for an example. And if we open up the app library, maybe we see our podcast app there, but I'm going to go ahead and search for podcast, P-O-D, and this will open Apple Podcasts. And so here we're looking at the home screen. You'll notice there's home, browse, library, and search. We're going to get into each of those in a bit. But right now you can see that there's an episode called Mixtapes to the Moon that we've been listening to. And then there's an up next section. So if I click on the what's in progress, Mixtapes to the Moon, you'll see the episode. And then I click on that cue it was referencing. And here's more episodes of that particular podcast called Radio Lab. So the podcast is Radio Lab, and Mixtapes to the Moon is an episode. And then up next, Argentine Invasion is another episode. Okay. All right, let's spend some time browsing around. So we saw the homepage before with our currently played and our up next. Based on Radio Lab, Apple has a you might like for us. But let's go into the browse window and just see all the different ways that you can be recommended different podcasts. So there are some popular ones at the top, new and noteworthy podcasts, top shows. I think top are rated by number of subscribers or number of downloads, top episodes. So maybe a particular episode of a show is getting a lot of traction, not just the episode. Top subscriber shows that people pay to subscribe to, and we'll see more there. Here's one that might be relevant beneath the top subscribers. Are you new to podcasts? What type of podcasts would you like? So different categories for anybody who's new. So this one is award-winning podcasts of different types of awards. What different types of awards have each of these podcasts won based on episode or based on show? There are a lot of categories there. The moment, things that are topical, daily news, trailers for a new upcoming podcast, podcasts that have new seasons, collections, Peabody Award winners, amusing investigations, tons and tons of different kind of, snippy categories, I guess, to try and find out which niche you're into, right? I want to focus on a particular section of the browse page, which is featured channels. We had talked earlier about how one might pay for podcasts. So far, everything we've looked at seems to be pretty free, unless otherwise specified. But channels kind of work like a TV channel where, let's open up Wondery. So you can see here, Wondery is a channel. It contains over 230 shows. So that's got 230 podcasts on it. So almost like a TV channel, has a bunch of shows within it. Podcast networks and podcast channels are popping up to be collections, sort of curated collections of podcasts. You can see right at the top, there's the Wondery Plus subscription model. Listen to episodes early and ad-free with Wondery Plus. So it is $5.99 a month or $4.99 a year after your free trial. Here are some of the new shows on this network, some of the top shows on this network, top episodes, but then Wondery Plus shows with subscription benefits. So maybe there are extra episodes, extra content that you wouldn't even get access to otherwise. Top Wondery Plus episodes. So top episodes that are only available with the subscription, and a description about the Wondery channel and what their aim is for bringing this collection together. So there are a number of podcast channels. Freakonomics Radio, History. This only has 10 shows, but it still has a subscription model to it. Oh, History Hit, Dateline, Pushkin, Lemonada. ESPN has a podcast channel. So they have a channel. They don't even have anything that it takes a subscription. So they have 79 shows, and at least through the Apple Podcast app, there's no way to pay them to access any additional content. So good on you, ESPN. From the browse window, we're now going to jump to the search function, which also gives us a little bit of browse functionality. You can obviously search for any podcast directly. So we mentioned Radiolab before. Let's search for Radiolab. And if I search there, I get some results. But I'm going to cancel out of that search and look at all of these categories that I can now search by. So the browse function tried to give a little bit of everything, right? There were top shows, there were curated categories of shows, but here, these are the more, I would say, traditional groupings of podcasts that you can then dive into. One that I find especially interesting is the sleep category. So some people just like podcasts to be on in the background to help them sleep at night. So here's a bunch of different podcasts in the sleep category, either for relaxation, meditation, or sleep, even to help kids sleep. Little story time. Um, so back in all of the categories: documentary, health and fitness, TV film, kids and family, language learning, I think is a pretty cool one too, that there are podcasts to help you learn other languages. There are also podcasts in different languages. So one category a little bit higher up was podcasts by language. And we can see many different categories here. Let's take a look at the library view. In the library, we can see the shows that we have interacted with. There's not a lot on this phone right now, but under shows, there's 2 podcasts, including Radiolab. Channels, we looked at channels at least for the subscriber benefit of it before, but a channel can be any sort of grouping of podcasts, and Radiolab is a channel. It looks like there's an 8-show channel for at least that Radiolab exists on here. If we saved a particular episode, we could save ones that we really like into there. Downloaded, as we covered before, downloaded means that we've pre-downloaded the whole audio file onto the memory of the phone so that there's no risk of network getting in the way of the listening experience. And then latest episodes is going to show more episodes from the podcast that we're subscribed to. And finally, what actually does it look like when we want to play one of these episodes? So let's click on this Mixtapes to the Moon that we've been listening to. And here's a view where you can see a lot of different functions. If I scroll over the time, I can fast forward or rewind. I can hit play to start the episode. The volume is on mute. We don't want to actually play somebody's podcast on here, but I can play and pause. I could skip ahead 30 seconds. I could go back 15 seconds. Different podcast apps will have different intervals for that sort of thing. If I hit on this 1x, this is showing how fast or slow I could play the podcast. So let's say I have this running in the background. I don't need to listen to every nuance. I could do like 1.5, 1.75, and they would start to sound like chipmunks at a certain point, but you would get through the episode a lot faster listening to it at a higher speed. There's this little moon and sleepy signal. Let's say you start listening to one and you're afraid you're going to fall asleep in the middle of the episode. you can have a little alarm to have it stop playing after a certain amount of time or when the current episode ends. In Apple Podcasts, at least, here's a volume toggle. And then there's a few more controls down here. This is called Queue, which has more episodes of the same podcast. This has a transcript one, which is pretty cool. So you could see a text readout if you were having a hard time understanding or you just like reading along. This one in the middle is AirPlay. So if there was another Apple device in the room that I could cast this to, essentially, to have a different speaker playing this episode, then I could use the AirPlay function. On different apps, it's going to be different types of features. So an iPhone will have AirPlay. I think an Android app will probably highlight the Chromecast functionality to keep it in the Google family, etc. And then there's this other menu of even more options. So we could remove this download if we wanted to take this off our queue, save some space on our phone, go to the episode, go to the show, save this episode, and it would show up in that list that we saw earlier. Mark it as played, view the transcript, share the episode or copy the link, or report a concern. And let's go back to the library view and see that this episode we just saved ended up there. So if you wanted a collection of your favorite episodes of all times across podcasts, then that's a feature you could use too. If you have any questions, if you're trying to get started and you're running into problems, that's SDM is here to help. So please visit our website, give us a call, make an appointment. We would be happy to help you get started on your podcasting journey.